Why would a single person decide to wipe an entire population off the face of the earth? What kind of intense hatred leads to the creation of gas chambers and death trains? These are difficult questions, but they represent a story that we must never forget. Today, we are exploring one of the darkest chapters in human history: Adolf Hitler's obsession with destroying the Jewish people. We will look at where this hatred began, how it spread so rapidly, and why millions of people chose to follow his lead. Before we dive into this chilling history, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to leave a comment below to let us know which historical mysteries or dark events you want us to investigate next. Now, are you ready? Because what you are about to hear goes far beyond the basic facts found in school textbooks. How far can one man's prejudice go? Can a distorted ideology actually become official government policy and pull an entire continent into a nightmare? This is more than just the biography of a dictator. It is a warning about how contempt, ignorance, and indifference can become weapons more destructive than any army. The artist who painted with hate. During World War II, the world witnessed absolute horror. Millions of people were persecuted, imprisoned, and murdered simply for being who they were. The Nazi machine targeted Jews, Roma, people with disabilities, and many others with terrifying efficiency. But one question still haunts us today. Why did Hitler hate the Jews? The answer isn't simple. It wasn't just a personal whim. It was a dark obsession rooted in history and personal failure. To understand the Holocaust, we must look at the man before he became a dictator. Adolf Hitler was not born with a heart full of hatred. In his early years, he was just a young man with a dream. He wanted to be an artist. In 1907, he moved to Vienna, the cultural capital of Europe, hoping to join the Academy of Fine Arts. He failed the entrance exam, not once, but twice. The professors told him he lacked talent. For Hitler, this wasn't just a rejection, it was a deep humiliation. While he lived in poverty in Vienna, sleeping in homeless shelters and selling postcards to survive, his resentment began to grow. Vienna at that time was a melting pot of ideas, but it was also a place where anti-Semitism, hostility toward Jews, was common in politics. Hitler began to listen to populist leaders who blamed Jewish people for all of society's problems. He needed a scapegoat for his own failures. Instead of blaming his lack of artistic skill or the changing economy, he began to believe a dangerous lie, that a Jewish conspiracy was holding back great Germany and talented people like himself. The hatred truly solidified after World War I. Germany lost the war and the economy collapsed. Hitler, who had served as a soldier, could not accept the defeat. He embraced a popular conspiracy theory called the stab in the back myth. This theory falsely claimed that the German army hadn't lost on the battlefield, but had been betrayed at home by Jews and communists. This lie gave his personal anger a political purpose. What started as a failed artist's resentment turned into fiery speeches in crowded beer halls. Hitler discovered he had a gift for public speaking, using his anger to influence a desperate nation. He promised that by purifying Germany of those he considered inferior, he could make the country great again. The artist who failed. In his youth, Adolf Hitler wasn't dreaming of concentration camps or world wars. Instead, his mind was filled with canvases, brushes, and art galleries. His greatest ambition was to be accepted into the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts. However, the city of Vienna had other plans for him. At the age of 18, Hitler left his small hometown in Austria and traveled to the imperial capital. He arrived with a suitcase full of hope and his best drawings. But the Academy did not see the talent he believed he possessed. He was rejected not once, but twice. The professors told him his paintings lacked the skill required for professional art. With those rejections, they unknowingly sparked a deep sense of resentment that would eventually change the world. Humiliated and without a clear path, Hitler began to wander through the streets of Vienna. He lived in homeless shelters, slept on park benches, and sold hand-painted postcards just to survive. It was a dark, lonely, and silent period of his life. However, he wasn't entirely alone. Dangerous ideas began to occupy his mind. He found these ideas in cheap newspapers, political pamphlets, and heated conversations in cafes. Nationalism, racism, and conspiracy theories were everywhere in the city. At that time, Vienna was a cultural melting pot where Jews, Slavs, Hungarians, and Czechs lived together. Vienna was struggling under the weight of its own diversity. The Jewish community, in particular, was very active and held a strong presence in science, banking, and the arts. Conservative groups viewed this success with suspicion and hatred. Hitler absorbed these prejudices. His transformation wasn't immediate. Little by little, his personal frustrations found a scapegoat. He started blaming people who had nothing to do with his failure as an artist. For Hitler, hating others was much easier than accepting that he simply wasn't good enough to be a professional painter. One person who deeply influenced him during this time was Karl Lueger, the mayor of Vienna. Lueger was charismatic, popular, and openly anti-Semitic. He used hatred as a political strategy to win elections, and it worked. Hitler took note of this. He realized that words could move the masses, and that the masses could be used to build empires or destroy civilizations. Between his failed drawings and the hateful speeches he heard, the young dreamer began to disappear. In his place, something darker and much more dangerous emerged. When a person's dreams die and are replaced by fanaticism, the results can be catastrophic. Vienna's dark influence. Early 20th century Vienna was no ordinary city. It was the heart of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the cultural center of Europe. However, beneath its beautiful surface, it was a boiling cauldron of social tension. Nationalists, socialists, and anti-Semites all lived in the same space, but they held very different views of the world. Among them was a young, failed man named Adolf Hitler. He lived in the shadows of this grand city with no money, no prestige, and no clear future. But he had plenty of time. He spent his days observing, reading, and building a new identity, not as an artist, but as a man who saw enemies everywhere. In the famous Viennese cafes, the conversation was shifting. Instead of discussing art or literature, people began debating theories about superior races and global conspiracies. Local bookstores were filled with pamphlets that falsely accused Jewish people of controlling the banks, the press, and the economy. In this environment, racist ideas were not just tolerated, they were often applauded. For a lost young man like Hitler, this atmosphere was seductive. It gave him a narrative for his own personal failures. He decided it wasn't his lack of talent that held him back. It was their fault. It was a simple, false, but very effective explanation. Hitler found a political role model in Karl Lueger, the mayor of Vienna. Lueger was a skilled populist who used hatred as a tool to win elections. Although Lueger reportedly had Jewish friends in private, his public strategy was clear. Blaming a minority group for society's problems created unity among his supporters and brought him power. Hitler watched and learned. Hitler also studied authors like Lanz von Liebenfels, who wrote about racial purity as if it were a real science. Magazines at the time often mixed social Darwinism, misunderstanding biology to justify social inequality. esoteric theories, strange, mystical beliefs about ancient ancestors. The Aryan myth, the idea of a master race destined to rule over others. Through these sources, Hitler developed a worldview where he saw himself as a future savior. In his mind, Jewish people became the eternal enemy, responsible for all of Germany's struggles. The Great Betrayal. On June 28, 1914, a bullet fired in Sarajevo lit the fuse that would set all of Europe ablaze. World War I was beginning. For a young Adolf Hitler, who had no money, no career, and no direction, this global conflict felt like an opportunity. Finally, he could serve a cause greater than himself. Finally, he could feel like he belonged. Hitler chose to enlist as a volunteer in the German army rather than the Austrian one. Even though he was born in Austria, his loyalty and heart already belonged to Germany. He was assigned as a messenger on the Western Front, a position that was incredibly dangerous. While he wasn't considered a natural leader by his fellow soldiers, he performed his duties with strict discipline. He was wounded in action, decorated for bravery, and changed forever by the experience. The deepest scar Hitler received wasn't caused by gunpowder or shrapnel. It was caused by the war's end. When Germany signed the armistice in 1918, Hitler was in a state of total shock. He could not process the defeat. To the soldiers at the front, it didn't feel like they had been beaten on the battlefield. Because he couldn't accept a military loss, he looked for a different explanation: betrayal. This led to the birth of one of the most dangerous myths of the 20th century, the Dolchstoßlegende, or the stab in the back theory. This conspiracy claimed that Germany had not lost the war on the front lines. The army was defeated by internal enemies. Jews, communists, and politicians were the traitors who sabotaged the country from within. There was no evidence to support this, but in a humiliated and desperate nation, the lie spread quickly. For Hitler, these conditions were unbearable. He could not stand to see the country he loved with religious fervor treated as a global outcast. Just as he had done during his difficult years in Vienna, he searched for someone to blame. He didn't look at the strategic failures of the German high command or the exhaustion of the population. Instead, he returned to his old prejudices. He found his scapegoats, and this time he was determined to make the whole nation see them through his eyes. This was the moment the frustrated soldier began his transformation into a political radical. The architect of hatred. Once again, Hitler found a way to point the finger. In his distorted view, the Jewish people were responsible for everything going wrong: moral decay, economic bankruptcy, and social division. It was a perfect narrative for a country desperate for simple answers to complex problems. The frustrated young man who had once dreamed of painting landscapes was now painting a target on an entire community. He wasn't using brushes on canvas anymore. He was planting images of enemies in the minds of a whole nation. While the trauma of World War I didn't create Hitler's hatred, it provided the perfect opportunity to spread it. His cause required a clear enemy, someone who could absorb all the rage and frustration of a broken people. As Germany struggled to rebuild, a new threat was growing from within. It wasn't an invading army, it was a dangerous ideology. To understand how this idea took hold, we have to look at the state of the country in the 1920s. At that time, Germany was struggling with economic collapse, extreme poverty, and lost hope. Hyperinflation turned banknotes into worthless scraps of paper. Families were so desperate, they actually burned stacks of German marks just to keep their homes warm. Bread lines were longer than any hope for a better future. In this atmosphere of total chaos, Adolf Hitler's voice began to echo through the streets. Hitler's message was carefully designed to appeal to a desperate population. He offered three things that people craved: external blame, promises of greatness, and a clear enemy. He told Germans that their suffering wasn't their fault. He spoke of a glorious future where Germany would rule again. He provided a specific group to hate, making it easier for people to channel their anger. What began as a set of radical ideas in Munich's beer halls quickly transformed into a political movement. Germany was a country without pride or direction, and Hitler offered a map, though it was a map that led straight toward a cliff. As the 1920s progressed, this failed artist realized that by controlling the narrative, he could control the people. The tragedy was not just that one man had these hateful ideas, but that an entire nation, blinded by misery, was becoming ready to listen. From speeches to the state. In 1919, Adolf Hitler joined a small extremist group called the German Workers' Party. At the time, he was a nobody. However, he possessed a terrifying talent: his ability to speak. At every rally, his voice ignited the hidden passions of the crowd. His energy was contagious, and his speeches were almost hypnotic. He rose through the ranks quickly, eventually changing the group's name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. Hitler did not invent anti-Semitism, but he refined it and turned it into a professional strategy to gain power. In 1925, while in prison, he published Mein Kampf, My Struggle. This book was a manifesto of hatred disguised as a political plan. In it, he argued that Germany could only be saved through three things. First was authoritarian leadership, a single, powerful leader, the Führer. Second was racial purity, the total removal of Jewish influence. And the last one was Lebensraum, living space, the conquest of new territories in Eastern Europe. But books alone weren't enough. Hitler understood that to control the masses, he needed spectacle. The Nazi Party became a visual machine, using torchlit marches, red flags, and powerful symbols like the swastika. These events were carefully choreographed to make people feel like they were part of something grand and powerful. The 1929 economic crash was the final blow for Germany's fragile democracy, the Weimar Republic. With millions unemployed and banks failing, the country was desperate. Hitler promised three things: jobs for the unemployed, an end to political street fighting, the restoration of German honor. In exchange, he demanded blind obedience and the acceptance of a common enemy. In 1933, he was appointed Chancellor. Shortly after, the Parliament building, the Reichstag, was set on fire. Hitler blamed the communists, using the event as an excuse to abolish civil freedoms and outlaw other political parties. By 1934, he proclaimed himself Führer. Once Hitler took power, his hateful rhetoric became the law of the land. He built a meticulous industrial machine designed to isolate and eventually eliminate the Jewish population. This process started with small, systematic steps. Jews were banned from holding public office. The Nuremberg laws stripped Jews of their citizenship and banned them from marrying non-Jewish Germans. Jews were forbidden from entering parks, owning radios, or visiting certain businesses. The Nazi propaganda machine portrayed Jewish people as parasites or threats to German purity. This dehumanization was the most critical step. By convincing the public that a specific group was less than human, the regime made the unthinkable seem necessary. Hatred had moved from the beer halls of Munich to the very heart of the German government. The final solution: from ghettos to factories of death. The next stage of the Nazi plan was even more brutal: physical exclusion. Jewish people were forced to wear the yellow Star of David on their clothing, marking them for public harassment. Their businesses were looted, and they were eventually expelled from their homes. They were moved into ghettos, overcrowded, walled-off neighborhoods where food and medicine were intentionally restricted. This misery was not an accident. It was a calculated part of the plan to weaken the population before the next phase. In 1939, when World War II began with the invasion of Poland, Hitler gained control over millions more Jewish people. It was then that the Nazi leadership developed the final solution. This was a bureaucratic euphemism used to hide their true goal: the total extermination of the Jewish people. Starting in 1942, 6 extermination camps were built in occupied Poland: Auschwitz-Birkenau, Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno-Majdanek. These were not labor camps. They were factories of death. Their design was chillingly efficient. Prisoners arrived by train, went through a selection process, and were sent to gas chambers, followed by crematoriums. At Auschwitz, the most infamous of these sites, the process was handled with industrial precision. Upon arrival, the elderly, children, and pregnant women were sent directly to the gas chambers. Those deemed strong enough were condemned to forced labor. The sign at the entrance famously read, "Arbeit macht frei," work sets you free. It was a cruel lie. Work actually meant a slow death through 14-hour days, extreme cold, starvation, and constant violence. When a prisoner was no longer useful, they were simply discarded. The machinery of extermination was not a temporary moment of madness. It was a system carefully designed by bureaucrats who organized the logistics and train schedules, engineers who designed the high-capacity gas chambers and ovens, doctors who performed cruel experiments and oversaw the selections. This was the most terrifying demonstration of what happens to a civilization when ethics and humanity are completely removed from the state. As the war came to an end, the Nazis tried to destroy the evidence. They burned documents and demolished the gas chambers to hide their crimes from the advancing Allied armies. However, they could not erase the testimonies of the survivors, the mountains of stolen belongings, or the horrific scars left on the world. This machinery of hate did not stop until Europe was covered in ashes, leaving behind a lesson that humanity must never forget. Life after the Holocaust. In 1945, the guns finally fell silent and the war ended. Cities began the slow process of rebuilding, but for millions of people, a different kind of horror was just beginning. The fall of the Third Reich did not bring immediate peace. Instead, it brought the deep, painful suffering of the survivor. When Allied forces liberated the camps, they found scenes that defied human imagination. Piles of bodies, ovens that were still warm, and skeletal prisoners who were too weak to speak. Men, women, and children had been reduced to mere shadows of themselves. Even after the gates were opened, there was often nowhere for the survivors to go. The reality they faced was devastating. Entire Jewish villages and neighborhoods had been completely wiped off the map. Most survivors discovered that every member of their family had been murdered. In many cases, their former homes had been taken over by others who did not want them back. In a brutal twist of irony, hundreds of thousands of Jews ended up in displaced persons, DP camps. They moved from Nazi captivity to living in improvised barracks, still behind fences, waiting for a homeland and a sense of certainty that seemed far away. And Western countries, including the United States and various European nations, offered very few options. Immigration borders remained largely closed. For most survivors, the only thing that mattered was finding a place where they could finally be safe, a place they could call home. For many, that home was Palestine. However, the path there was blocked by several factors. 1. British control. The region was governed by the British Mandate, which had strict limits on how many Jewish people could enter. 2. Rising tensions. There was growing conflict with the local Arab population who opposed mass immigration. 3. The Exodus movement. Despite the risks, secret networks began operating to smuggle survivors across the sea to what they considered their promised land. The end of the war was not the end of the tragedy. It was the beginning of a long search for identity and justice. The world had to face the evidence of a crime so large, it required a new word: genocide. As we look back on this history, we see that the liberation of the camps was only the first step. The real challenge was, and still is, ensuring that the ideology which built those camps never finds a home in the human heart again. In 1948, with the creation of the State of Israel, part of the Jewish diaspora finally found a place to start over. It was a beginning marked by hope, but also by conflict and bloodshed. Still, the goal was clear: to ensure they would never again be persecuted simply for existing. However, the Holocaust left deep, invisible wounds in language, culture, and identity. Before the war, Yiddish was a vibrant language spoken by over 11 million people, filled with humor and history. After the genocide, that voice was largely silenced. The tragedy was like a spiritual earthquake. It forced people to ask difficult questions. How can one believe in a just God after Auschwitz? Thank you for watching this video all the way to the end. If you found this exploration of history meaningful and are passionate about learning more, please subscribe to the channel. By joining our community, you won't miss our upcoming videos as we continue to uncover fascinating and important stories from our shared past. See you in the next video.